uncertainty fundamentally comes from incomplete knowledge about all of the things that can happen. But let's face it, life itself is uncertain.
Right.
And I think that the notion that innovators and enterprising people are actually risk tolerant, risk loving is missing the fact that they actually want to minimize any known risk, but at the same time are very comfortable making decisions where the future is not fully known and deterministic.
Welcome to the TalentGrow Show, where you can get actionable, results-oriented insight and advice on how to take your leadership, communication, and people skills to the next level and become the kind of leader people want to follow. And now, your host and leadership development strategist, Halelly Azulay.
Welcome back, Talent Growers. I'm Halelly Azulay, your leadership development strategist here at TalentGrow, the company that sponsors the TalentGrow Show so that you can receive great leadership advice and actionable ideas every Tuesday. And this week's episode is with a professor of leadership, of enterprise, of innovation. In this very wide-ranging conversation with Professor Rajshree Agarwal, we talk about some of the career decisions that have shaped her career and things you can learn from it. We talk about the idea of risk versus security and experimentation. We talk about how to share and seek knowledge and look for mentors. We talk about social comparison versus envy. And we talk about how to be kind instead of nice. We cover a lot of ground in this 30-minute conversation. So I hope that you'll enjoy it. Without further ado, let's dig in. Welcome back, Talent Growers. I have Rajshree Agarwal. She is the director of the Ed Snyder Center for Enterprise and Markets at the University of Maryland, which is my alma mater. She is now my third University of Maryland professor on the Talent Grow Show. First was Dr. Ed Locke on episode 95, and also Professor Michelle Gelfand on episode 133. And Professor Agarwal conducts research on the evolution of industries, firms, and individual careers, as fostered by the twin engines of innovation and enterprise. Her scholarship uses an interdisciplinary lens to provide insights on strategic innovation for new venture creation and for firm renewal. Her teaching and engagement in growth-oriented firms help business professionals advance through personal leadership, develop win-win relationships, and create a virtuous spiral between their aspirations and abilities. I love that. Welcome to the show, Rajshree.
Well, good afternoon, Halelly, and thank you so much for having me be part of your show.
I really appreciate you taking the time, and I look forward to talking with you about leadership and all of the things that you bring to the world from your perspective. But before we do, we always have our guests describe their professional journey very briefly. Where did you start, and how did you end up where you are today?
Well, I started off as an economist, got my PhD in economics. And for the first 7 or 8 years of my research and teaching career, I was actually in an economics department. And as you've already read from my bio, I ended up studying the evolution of industries. But very quickly, I realized it's not industries that make decisions as they evolve and grow and even die. It's really the firms, and not even the firms within them, but the individuals who, through their own personal aspirations, because they are leveraging their knowledge, they are the ones that create new firms, grow them, renew them as the environment dictates and requires, sometimes even create their own environment. And so those were the things that really fascinated me. So I often think of myself in my journey as starting off first as an economist, then transitioning into strategic management, then transitioning into strategic entrepreneurship. And by that, I don't mean just new firms and small firms. I also mean existing firms and leaders within them that are looking to change and grow. And then finally, at this stage of my career, to think about how enterprising people, whether they are high school students enrolled in our SELF program, for instance, that's ongoing right now, all the way through the executive MBAs that I interact with, how can they leverage their own personal leadership for themselves, for the teams that they work with, and for the organizations that they choose to associate themselves with?
And this is exactly the intersection between your interests and mine, which is why we get along so well, and why I knew that once we spoke some more and get to know each other a little bit better, and I read some more of your writing, I wanted to bring you onto the show and share your perspective, because you bring a lot of depth, but also breadth, as you described, to leadership. And
on that point, Halelly, as you said, Michelle and Ed, two people that are scholars that have been affiliated with University of Maryland, or still are, and of course, good friends of mine. A lot of the personal leadership aspect comes from the organizational behavior, industrial psychology perspective, which is exactly what Michelle and Ed have focused on. In my own journey, I have gravitated more towards that, but I also retain the economic/strategic element. So I like to think about it as bringing both psychological and economic lenses together, because, I ultimately am fundamentally passionate about upward mobility, but I don't define upward mobility just in economic terms, but also in psychological and intellectual growth.
Oh, okay. Well, I want to talk more about that then. What upward mobility? So intellectual, psychological, and economic growth.
Yes.
So when you think about growth, do you think, and you said the word upward, to me, it defines a very specific direction, obviously.
Yes.
And a lot of times, I know you experience this probably, and I talk to people all the time about career growth and direction as a leader, also helping your employees create a path for development. And so often people are very hyper focused on like the ladder, climbing the ladder, or in terms of a firm, as I struggle with my own firm's vision and where I want to go, there is this sense that you're supposed to just keep growing and growing and growing. And I believe that's not the case. And it's not always just up, or it's not always just bigger is better. What do you think about that?
I agree. So when I'm saying upward mobility, I don't necessarily mean either linear or ladder climbing. In fact, that stresses me out just thinking of that. Honestly, when I'm thinking about upward mobility, it's very simple. It is about knowing what your priorities are. Again, this is one of the reasons why the ladder climbing, linear visualization of upward mobility, I think, detracts from the richness of experiences that ultimately lead you towards the journey being the destination. And when I think about journeys, I don't necessarily think of upward climbs as much as unfolding vistas. And these vistas could be sometimes economic focused, sometimes intellectual focused, and sometimes psychological focused. And as you're going on one direction, it may very well be that you take a backseat on other directions. So I'll give you an example of my own career.
Okay.
So I told you that I was an economist, and then I transitioned into strategic management. I had promotion and tenure the year I switched organizations from University of Central Florida to University of Illinois. And I gave up both tenure and promotion to start off as an assistant professor in a brand new discipline. Now, if you know anything about academia, you know that tenure is highly coveted.
Yes.
And so if many people would look at me and say, are you freaking crazy? I mean, you're giving up tenure, you're giving up security to start all the way afresh. But for me, that was not downward movement. So yes, on the one realm, you could say I gave up promotion. So it's not a career climb, a ladder rung. In fact, I've come down 2 steps. But for me, that was upward mobility. The reason why that was the case was because I realized that my interests were more aligned in business and in management and not in economics. And I needed to be true to my aspirations. I needed to be true to my own personal growth mindset, if you will. And so then, and of course, there was also an element of, yes, there's an element of risk, there's an element of uncertainty, but I was embracing that given that I knew what was the potential achievement that I could make out there. So in the long run, it ended up being hugely upward mobile, even though in the short run, people would say that I took 2 steps back.
And that risk aversion, I think, drives so many people. It's interesting you focus on entrepreneurship and innovation, and both of those disciplines, or whatever you want to categorize them as, both of those require a certain tolerance of risk, or maybe even an appetite for risk, because no innovation is possible and no entrepreneurship is possible if you want everything to be perfect and no failure to be a possibility.
And if I may reframe that, I actually think I'm highly risk averse. Right? Now, why am I saying that I'm highly risk averse and yet I'm doing all of these things about giving up promotion and tenure? Because I think that the reframing of it is you want to minimize everything that you can and mitigate all of the potential things that could go wrong, right? But you also want to be open to gaining and learning new knowledge. So for me, I don't think in terms of risk as much as I'm very comfortable making decisions in uncertain environments, which is different from risk. Now, what do I mean by that? Uncertainty fundamentally comes from incomplete knowledge about all of the things that can happen. But let's face it, life itself is uncertain.
Right.
And I think that the notion that innovators and enterprising people are actually risk tolerant, risk loving is missing the fact that they actually want to minimize any known risk, but at the same time are very comfortable making decisions where the future is not fully known and deterministic.
So they just move towards a decision more willingly than some other people who are just waiting to have all the ducks in a row, which is technically impossible, before making any kind of a move.
Right. So it is that comfort level that even if in some sense you fail, you're still gaining a lot of knowledge. So failure in one dimension may still mean success in another level. So let me give you another example, right? I often tell particularly mid-level executives that feel like they're being trapped in their current position, or they feel like they're not necessarily growing, but at the same time are a little scared about giving up the security of their current job to venture anew into a new position, right? Because it's also the devil you know versus the devil you don't,
Right.
all of those aspects that come into play. And I often tell them, you can think about all of the things that you don't know that may go wrong, but you also know all of the things right now that you're stymied by, frustrated by, not waking up with a spring in your step. So how much better off would you be to at least give yourself permission to explore? And so even if it may be that you have, you're in a job where you feel like you're not being as successful as you can, or even failing, then the question out there is, well, what is a better fit for me? And so to be proactive about knowing what are your abilities, what are your aspirations, and then how do you go about identifying your priorities given this, and then how do you seek win-win relationships with other people where you're creating value and they're creating value. All of that requires a lot of mental thought and energy and action, but none of them are being couched in risk terms.
Yes, and action. I hear in your description, and I think I hear this and I agree with it, that it's like an experiment because there's things you don't know, but you know what you have now is not necessarily ideal. Then it's better to take mitigated or thoughtful calculated action, and try it as an experiment, recognizing that you'll gain more input about, oh, well, that wasn't right either for these reasons. And that just sort of calibrates you towards the right thing one step at a time.
And Halelly, I really appreciated the fact that you used the word experimentation, because if I think about mitigating uncertainty and making decisions under uncertainty as really either trying to resolve the missing gaps in your knowledge, you can really do it in 2 ways. And I encourage people to do both. One is experiment yourself, but the other is share knowledge. seek knowledge. So not everything has to be reinvented again and again, right? You can benefit. And this is where I see a huge amount of value add in relationships where you're bringing together complementary people, but also to the extent that I may not know, the first thing that I should do, again, in the interests of mitigating time costs and going down paths that are going to lead to nowhere, is ask people. So again, for this particular mid-level executive that feels like they're stuck in a position, right? So dream. What is it that you want to do? And then go ask the person that's already successful in that area. Take them out for coffee. Say, blue sky thinking. What is it that you would do differently? So gather information and experiment. These are the two actions through which you can make very good decisions in an uncertain environment.
Yeah, that's awesome. And, so you get mentors rather than trying to go it alone. One of the things that I read, you write a great column for Forbes, and I was reading some of your back articles. It was very hard for me to choose ones that I wanted to talk with you about. There's so many good ones. But one that seems relevant here, a little bit relevant here, is this idea of social comparison, because we are each on a different path. And it's very hard to compare ourselves truly like apples to apples when we look at someone else. But there's some value in comparing ourselves to others, and also some detriment, and envy comes up. And you wrote an article about this, how it is really important for people to, and leaders especially, to recognize that there's potential positive and negative emotions that get triggered when we compare ourselves. So what's important for leaders to know about this difference between envy and social comparison?
So social comparison, as you just said, Halelly, is, you and I are socially together in our network. And so it's very natural for you and I to look at each other and say, Halelly, I'm really, you've got this great podcast on TalentGrow and you're doing so well. And there can be a part of me that, I'm very, very established in the academic realm. One of the things that I do want to do is reach out to people that are actually doing the things that I research and talk about, which is enterprising people, right? And you're already talking to them. Wow, how great is that, right? And I can also be envious. Hey, Halelly, you've got this great, successful podcast. How can I do that too?
Mm-hmm.
Or on the other hand, you may feel the same about me, that, you've got this, Forbes column that you're writing regularly on, you're a faculty member, we can both compare. So there could be areas that I feel like I could learn from you, you have. So envy or hope and inspiration are emotions that get triggered when someone has something that you aspire to or desire having yourself, but you personally don't have, right? Envy is really a negative emotion. It's about feeling resentment. You have it, I don't.
Mm-hmm.
But the same social comparison can cause me to feel hope and inspiration. Wow, Halelly, you've done this. What can I learn from you? Can you share with me what's successful about it? And then, of course, your benevolence towards this downward social comparison. I have something that Rajshree doesn't have. So you could either feel jealousy. The word jealous lover comes from the fact that I don't want to lose something that I have to someone else.
Like a scarcity mentality.
Right. So this downward comparison can either trigger jealousy and fear on your part, or it can trigger gratitude and benevolence and innovative spirit that, wow, I really value what I have. So how do I make sure that I continue to keep it and maintain it rather than kind of erect barriers? So social comparisons is natural. Whether you allow it to create envy and jealousy in you, or hope and inspiration, or benevolence and gratitude, is your choice. And then based on these emotions that you can reframe more towards the positive direction, you can also then choose to follow through with strategies that allow you to grow regardless of where you are. So that at the end of the day, the issue is not social comparison as in, are you better than me or am I better than you? But it is that we each go on our own paths seeking to do whatever it is that we do best. So it's an absolute level growth for each and every one of us. And then you and I don't become competitors, but collaborators.
Yeah. Or just at least, I like your use of the word benevolence, just have a benevolent demeanor to others rather than like being stingy or nasty to them.
And Haleli, isn't it so much more fun to be
Yeah.
around people that are positive and benevolent as
Yes.
opposed to worrying about people that are, and yourself too. I mean, I would be so much more uncomfortable in my skin.
Oh, for
And I
sure.
am on the times when I feel threatened or
Mhm.
envious and so on. And of course, I'll admit to having those emotions.
Yeah.
They make me first and foremost uncomfortable about myself. I don't
Yeah.
like feeling those feelings.
No. Yeah. It's interesting, and we can't go too far into it, and maybe I need to get some therapy about this, but I'm actually struggling. I've like these days, it's so top of mind for me in a totally different realm, which is I've switched gyms.
Yes.
And unfortunately, it was because I loved my gym and it got bought out by another organization that completely changed the culture of it.
Ah, bummer.
And that's so similar to what organizations go through, with culture change. And it was not a good fit for me. What I loved about it is that I always felt very welcomed and challenged. And there was
Yes.
a positive, benevolent social comparison available to me. There were people that were role models that were better than me. And there were people to whom I was a role model. And I really enjoyed kind of being in the middle. Like I wasn't exactly in the middle, but I really liked that range. And what I'm finding in my new gym, it's hyper competitive. And it doesn't have a negative feeling, but it doesn't have as much of that virtuous, benevolent feeling. Like I feel kind of like everybody's just there to take care of themselves, but not too interested in the others.
Yeah.
And almost everyone seems to be way better than me. And I'm really struggling. Like, I don't want to feel badly about myself when I go to the gym. And I also don't want to compare myself, but I can't help it. Like, I've been thinking about it. Like, I really liked having that range of,
Yes.
around me.
No, it does sound that first gym definitely had a great culture. So, I mean, I feel what you're saying. I mean, I hear what you're saying. One thing that you may want to do is even within them, who are the people that are the least competitive, right? And this is one of the reasons why when we talk in terms of strategy, just to shift a little bit, but also relate to it, I don't like to use the word competitive advantage.
Mhm.
Honestly, as a strategy professor, I always talk about creating and capturing value
Mhm.
as the more immediate concept. So it's really not about whether I'm better than you or I'm winning and you're losing. That may happen, but it's a secondary consequence. What I want to figure out is how am I creating value for myself and for others? And then, of course, part of capturing the value that you create is making sure that you are getting the joy, the monetary compensation, the psychological satisfaction, the sociological status. These are all nice reference to have. And how do you make sure that you are doing that and growing along the way? So, focus on those aspects, both at work and at home, I think, or at the gym, more so than, this competitive culture. That kind of makes me shudder. And it almost creates this us versus them mentality, me versus you. And I don't, at least I know that isn't a good fit for me. And
Yeah.
I'd walk away and do some things all by myself before I would get that culture.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, food for thought. And speaking of things you do at home and things you do at work, there was an article you wrote about how work-life balance is something that a lot of people are focusing on the wrong way. You were saying that people are trying to think about work-life balance in terms of sort of adding up hours and counting hours and making sure you have a balance in that amount of time you're spending on your personal endeavors versus professional endeavors. And you're saying that's wrong. We should focus on something else. Say more.
Yeah, so it's not that it's wrong because actually, if you were to think about it, our life is on a 24-hour clock
Yeah.
and we're either professionally engaged or we're personally engaged.
Mhm.
That's really the two things. And so, at one level, of course, it's natural to start off with counting hours, right? How many hours do I work? How many hours do I go to the gym? How many hours do I spend having quality time with my kids or with my husband or with my friends? How often do I want to get a massage? All of these are
Mhm.
hours in a day that you have to spend.
Right.
And in fact, I started off, so this article I ended up writing, it's one of the articles that I'm really, really fond of because it started off with my then 16-year-old challenging me by saying, I have more stress and responsibility in my life than you do. And it's like, huh?
Talk about
Really?
social comparison.
That's right? Talk about social comparison too. And so I very naturally fell into exactly this issue of, well, let's count the hours in your day when you have stress and responsibilities and jobs that you need to do as opposed to fun time. And let's count mine. And hands down, I'm going to win. But one of the things that I realized is my daughter switched the conversation on me in a very meaningful way, because her point was not about what was I doing in terms of work versus homework versus work fun versus home fun. She says, you love your job. So you can't say that that's work. That's fun. And when you're taking us for chores, when you're taking us for volleyball matches, how dare you say that's a chore like washing dishes, right? You're demeaning the quality time that we're spending with each other. And, and then she's talking about the fact that she has to do the homework. She has to do this. And I realized that the bigger picture that we were both missing, and in fact, most of us miss when we count hours for work-life balance, is the fact that I had autonomy. I had choices. She didn't. As a high school kid, she had her parents telling her what she should be doing, her teachers telling her that she needed a hall pass to even go to the bathroom, right? So she had no autonomy. And of course, stress and this lack of balance of mind comes when you're feeling overwhelmed. Overwhelmed is an emotional reaction to feeling like you're being pulled in different directions.
Yeah.
But if you have your priorities that you have yourself created, like, I love my work, I love my family. Either of them, not having them would leave an intolerable void in my life. So now I am taking ownership, I am having the autonomy, and I'm assigning meaning. Then that becomes the more important issue. And then, of course, there's 24 hours in everybody's day.
Yeah. Time is the great equalizer. It's the only thing. It's the only resource we all have equal amounts of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But how we use it,
and
the choices we exercise makes it uniquely ours.
Yeah.
And that's the part of work-life balance.
I like that. So I think that one of the key themes in our conversation today has been the proactive reframing, choosing how we look at things and what lens we use in order to minimize the negatives and maximize the value.
That would be a good way of saying it, yes.
Yeah, I love it. Well, Rajshree, it's been fun to talk to you, and I would love to do it for a lot more, but we are almost out of time. We always have one specific actionable tip, but before that, what's new and exciting on your horizon?
Oh, wow. On what dimensions and how much time do you have, Halelly?
A short amount of time. Give us the highlights.
Well, at this moment, what's really new and exciting and that I'm living in the moment on is, every year we have a high school program where we get aspiring, rising juniors and seniors in high school that are getting college ready. They're thinking about, this ascension into adulthood and making the autonomous decisions, kind of cutting the umbilical cord with their family, because once they go to college, once they start life after 18, they're going to be making their own decisions. So we get them for 2 weeks here in the SELF program, the Snyder Enterprise and Leadership Program. And that for me is a 2-week period that I gain immense inspiration from, because here are people that are just so bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. Oh my gosh. And they've got their life ahead of them. And how inspiring to be part of that and help them create their own personal leadership plan. So that's what's new and exciting for me. And I am relishing every moment.
Oh, lovely. Oh, nice. Well, good. I love that. All right. So one specific action that listeners can take today, tomorrow, this week that can help them upgrade their leadership skills or their career, whichever angle you want to take on it.
So in terms of leadership skills, I will say, and this also relates to their own career too, because personal leadership is, the self-oriented leadership aspect. And then leadership, as we usually talk about it, is of course oriented towards others that you choose to have in your life.
Right.
For me, it is really about being kind to yourself and to the people around you, which is different than being nice. To the people around you or nice to yourself. Nice means I want to be liked. either by other people or by myself. But being liked is not the same as giving people, including yourself, the feedback that you need in order to grow. So often catch yourself when you're being nice to someone because you're stopping yourself from giving them positive, constructive feedback that will definitely help them because you're fearful of their reaction to your feedback. Now, don't be a jerk about the way you give feedback. Don't be critical. Don't be negative. Don't bring them down. And don't bring yourself down in the self-critic in your head, if you will.
Yeah.
But be kind, as in thinking about what are the areas that need to be focused on, to be worked on, so that at the end of the day, you're going on this journey, which is your destination.
So kind is constructive and future focused, whereas nice is just focused on minimizing tension in the moment.
Yes. And in fact, it's constructive, future focused, and it's also about sometimes giving feedback that you know, or you take, again, going back and full circle to where we were, fearing the uncertainty of the reaction is stopping you from doing what you believe is right.
Right.
So you don't feel good because now you feel like you're being a hypocrite, and the other person can certainly see through the fact that what you're saying is not jiving with your other, non-spoken actions.
Yes, you seem like you're out of congruence.
Yes.
Very good. Oh, I love it. Well, Rajshree, we are out of time. I know people are going to want to hear more from you, learn more from you. What are the best ways for them to follow and get in touch with you on the web, on social?
Yeah, so usually on my own personal website, and Halelly, I can provide that for you so that you can put it on your resources page.
Okay.
I usually have a whole list of not just my research articles, but also my Forbes columns, my podcasts, such as the one that I just did with you, other appearances. So, and I would love to, my emails on there too. Please, I would love to hear from your readers in ways in which I can learn and grow based on what resonated with them about our conversation.
Fantastic. Well, we will link to that and hopefully the new conversations will start. I would love to hear about it too. Rajshree, thank you so much for spending some of your time on the TalentGrow Show. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Halelly.
What did I tell you, talent growers? So much to talk about in such a little amount of time. I hope that you enjoyed it. I'd love to hear what you thought. I always seek your feedback and input. And also, of course, what would you like me to cover next on the TalentGrow Show? What guests, what topics, what solo episodes would you like to hear about? So this is it for this week's episode. I hope that you will take action, and I would love to hear what you did, what your biggest takeaway was, what you took action on, and how it went. I'm Halelly Azulay, your leadership development strategist here at TalentGrow, and this is the TalentGrow Show. Thanks for listening, and until the next time, make today great.
Thanks for listening to the TalentGrow Show, where we help you develop your talent to become the kind of leader that people want to follow. For more information, visit talentgrow.com.